Welcome to Season 4 of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. Today on the show, we chat with Rob Culligan, Vice President of Institutional Advancement at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. Rob shares how he got started as a development officer, how his team created extra financial support for students during the pandemic, and the fulfillment he feels in helping young men realize their dreams. Before we get started, you'll find that Rob and I spend a fair amount of time discussing the key elements of the St. John's experience. On a personal note, I felt that my time at St. John's made a significant difference in the trajectory of my life. The Benedictine Values, such as dignity of work, justice, listening, moderation, respect for persons, to name a few. These are the values that became instilled in us at St. John's as we learned what it meant to be men and left the university prepared to better the lives of our families and our communities. So while I'm aware that we spend a little extra time talking about the institution itself, I felt it might be a good reference point for you to gain some understanding of how being a Johnny made a difference in my own path to success. And with that, here's my interview with Rob. Hi, Rob. Good to see you on Zoom. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Good to see you again, Joe. What a pleasure.
Well, so there might be a few people in our listening audience who are not familiar with St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. Maybe for those folks, you could fill in the blanks for them.
Sure. Well, it's a marvelous place. Some call it the center of the universe. The former president of St. John's, Brother Dietrich Reinhardt, used to kid that it's on the way from Minneapolis to Fargo. But it's a beautiful spot, 3,000 acres of woods, 5 lakes, a wonderful place to go to college, but also just a true gem, cultural treasure in Minnesota. So much to see, so much history. Founded in 1856, one of the longest, oldest private colleges, certainly in Minnesota, but in the upper Midwest.
I was just talking to somebody before we sat down today, and I, as a Johnny alum, it's one of my favorite places to be, only in that whenever I'm on campus, I am totally calm. For me, it's just a quiet, serene, relaxing, and it feels like whether it was 2020 or 1920, it could be either or when I walk on campus.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have that feeling, whether they're an alumnus or just a guest, that they get off the interstate and come around the bend, they see the Bell Banner, and they have this instant feeling of peacefulness. And I think that that's the nature of the place. In fact, there's a book about St. John's called A Sense of Place, and I think it was aptly named.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those who don't know about St. John's, a few things that it's famous for is the Johnny bread, an old Bavarian recipe brought over by the monks when they came from Germany, and all Johnnies know about it. Mm-hmm. And then St. John's is the birthplace of Minnesota Public Radio, which is quite extraordinary. It began there with, at the time, a young man named Garrison Keillor. Mm. And the person who launched Minnesota Public Radio at St. John's with Father Coleman Berry was Bill Kling of NPR fame. We're also known for our legendary football coach, John Glardy, who now passed, but when he retired, he was and still is the winningest coach in the history of football, any levels, college or pro.
Right. The other thing that I think about when you are a graduate of St. John's, people don't say I went to St. John's. People say they are Johnnies.
Yep.
And for us who are Johnnies, we know what that means, but maybe you could share the meaning behind that.
Yeah, so, there are a bunch of great sayings about St. John's. That's one of them, that people don't say where they went to college. They say what they are. I'm a Johnny. It's a state of being. The other expression is once a Johnny, always a Johnny. And this is truly a lifelong experience and engagement with alma mater, but really with other Johnnies as well. And then the last thing is St. John's isn't that large of a university. There are about 1,700 students at St. John's, another 1,700 to 1,800 students at our sister college, the College of St. Benedict. And one thing we hear often in Minnesota is people saying, there's not a lot of Johnnies, but they're everywhere.
Let's talk about your role now at St. John's. You're the Vice President of Institutional Advancement, and you mentioned the sister school, the College of St. Benedict. Is the advancement department for St. John's and for St. Ben's, is it separate or is it together?
Well, they're two separate offices for each school, though we do a lot of programming together. And just for those who are scratching their head about what is institutional advancement, it's really several key areas that deal with the external relations of a college. Probably the biggest thing is alumni relations. At St. Ben's, it's alumni relations. Mm-hmm. And then it's fundraising activities for the college. And of course, we do all kinds of events and activities, educational and social, throughout the year. When it comes to St. John's and St. Ben's, even though we have two different offices, almost all of our alumni and alumni events are done together. These are graduates who took all their classes together, really from about 1970 onward. Students who came to St. John's and St. Ben's had, in essence, a co-educational experience with all their classes being taken together on one campus or the other. The only difference, the women live at St. Ben's, the men live at St. John's. And we have programming that is specially dedicated to men and women. Mm-hmm. And we pride ourselves on that unique quality of being focused on the holistic development of women and the holistic development of men. And we feel that we offer the best of both worlds. You can have a co-educational academic experience, but you have all the advantages of a gender-specific college and the leadership opportunities that come from that. Mm-hmm.
How did you start down the path with institutional advancement? Is that something you wanted to do at an early age, or how did that evolve?
No, certainly not. I kind of fell into it. When I was in college, my plans were to become a lawyer. So I was a political science major, was on a pre-law track. Between my junior and senior year, I had an internship with the Attorney General's office. And I realized that it wasn't that interesting of work. And also, it was at a point in my life where I just thought, man, our society is just becoming so litigious. We're surrounded by more and more laws, and I wasn't sure I wanted to dedicate my life to that profession. And when I made that decision, it opened up the whole world to me freshly. And that was very freeing. And while I would say I still didn't know what I wanted to do at that point for a career, it gave me a whole array of options to explore. Mm-hmm. I ended up working for 2 years at St. John's right out of college doing admissions work, which is a great job for any graduate of a college to represent their alma mater, to be able to go out and talk on its behalf, and certainly developed a lot of great, strengthening of interpersonal skills and communication skills, and the power of persuasion, which was all good. Those things serve you well no matter where you go.
Right.
But when I went to leave, Father Don LeMay, who had been the vice president for external relations at St. John's, came to me and said, "Rob, we don't want you to leave. We'd like you to stay. We think someday you could be a great development officer for St. John's." And I looked at him with panic. And I said, "Father Don, I could never ask anybody for money." And I was being totally truthful.
Right.
And that's the last thing I would have wanted to do at that time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how life can come full circle. And in my case, it did.
Mm-hmm.
And, when we had our first child and we were living in Colorado, we loved it. But we were a long ways from home and decided to move back to the Midwest and to Minnesota. And there was a job available at the College of St. Benedict as a grant writer. And I had those skills, and they knew me. Of course, I knew St. Ben's and St. John's, and I was fortunate to be offered that job. And that set me on a new trajectory of being involved in fundraising. And it didn't seem as daunting as I thought it once was. And it's actually great work. And I wouldn't trade my job right now for anything. It's been fabulous.
So what's the breakdown of the different campaigns your team is working on in a given year? I mean, I imagine there's a mix of annual funding for ongoing expenses and maybe larger campaigns for special projects. You guys are critical in keeping the university financially viable, correct?
Yeah, so true. For most organizations, they're both trying to raise money for the expenses they have for that year, but they're also doing special projects and trying to raise endowment funds to support themselves into the future. So we do that at St. John's and St. Ben's as well. Our annual appeal to all alums and parents and friends, we call the Student Fund. It's raising money for scholarships for our students each year. And our target for that is roughly $3 million at St. John's, a similar amount at St. Ben's, and thousands of alumni give to that every year.
And that primarily supports tuition for the kids?
Goes directly to tuition costs of students. And it's really the alums and friends who are helping underwrite the cost of a student's education. Then on top of that, we're typically raising money for some kind of brick and mortar project, an arts facility, a science facility, a renovation to the library. And those can be significant. A single construction project could be anywhere from $5 million to $25 million, depending upon the size and nature of the space. And then we are continuously raising money for the endowment.
I always thought endowment for the operational cost for the university? Is that for tuition support? I mean, is it very different than your student fund when you think of the endowment?
There are some similarities and there's some differences. So first, an endowment simply the different, current dollars, you spend it all in the year it's received. Okay. With an endowment, you don't spend the corpus. So if somebody gives you $1 million, you invest that $1 million. And then you spend the interest off of it.
I see. Okay.
And typically, a nonprofit will spend between 4 and 5% of it per year. And then it grows over time and it becomes larger and larger and it's there in perpetuity. So that's how it works. An endowment can be designated for pretty much anything. So somebody can give us a gift to endowment and say, I want it for a scholarship fund, which is the most common. Or they could say, I want it for a program like the McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement, or the McNeely Center for Entrepreneurship, or I want it for a professorship in English, or I'd like it for a lecture in biotechnology. So they can be earmarked for any variety of purpose. The beauty of it is it will fund something on an ongoing annual basis, so you don't have to keep fundraising for it. It's taken care of. And in a given year, we set fundraising targets. I mentioned for the student fund, it's $3 million. But for all of our giving activities at St. John's, our target is about $30 million per year. Now, that's not all in cash. Some of it is pledges. Some of it is planned gifts that'll come into the future. But we put a value to it and we count it towards what we're striving for from a fundraising perspective. People have been very generous to St. John's over the years, and particularly during this past year, during the pandemic, a lot of people have dug deep, and they know that students and their families are really stretched thin, and many of them are coming from families where there's been some kind of economic hardship. So we've had one of the best years ever at St. John's. And the vast majority of it has been earmarked for scholarships for students facing hardship to ensure that they can continue to afford to go and get their education and that they return from one year to the next when, frankly, there's been so much uncertainty in colleges and universities due to the pandemic about, can we bring students to campus? Can they go to class? How do we offer the courses online too, so they have that option? And we've been blessed, and I'd say our students have been blessed, students, faculty, and staff, because of the generosity of others.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear you say that. I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you is, how difficult has it been to do fundraising in a year like this of uncertainty? And it sounds like what you're saying is this has been one of your best years. Was it a campaign that you put out to try to help the university with the uncertainty, or did you find that there were alumni or alumnae reaching out to you saying, how can we help?
It was both. People came to us, and obviously we went out to them. Last March when all of our students had to go home, and many of them didn't have the money to pack up and leave and get home, overnight we launched an emergency student fund, both at St. John's and St. Ben's. And, within 2 weeks, we each had received nearly $100,000. We used that, went directly to students so that they could get home, they could get online, they could have internet service or laptop or whatever they needed so that they could get reestablished and back learning online. So that happened immediately and quickly. Then in May, we were concerned about, will the students come back?
Right.
And we took a little different approach. Rather than casting that broadly and asking for donations from everybody, we set our targets at raising one big capital infusion for scholarships. And we approached 5 families and asked them if they would each donate $1 million to help our students get through this pandemic. And every one of them responded.
Wow.
Again, a much larger, more significant commitment of funds that we have been able to use to ensure that students can continue their education.
Did you find then, or was St. John's able to provide more financial aid this year as a whole, regardless of the source, than they were a year ago?
Significantly more.
And what was the difference in enrollment from the fall of 2020 to the fall of 2021?
Well, interesting, back in last April, they were predicting that enrollments at colleges and universities across the country would fall anywhere from 15 to 20% due to the pandemic.
And that's enough to bankrupt a school, isn't it? 50, right?
Exactly. There was reason to be deeply concerned about it, and that's why we hustled and put together what we called this imperative fund,
right?
Raising $5 million. It wasn't nice to have money, it was must-have money. This was not only imperative for our students, but the future of colleges and universities were in the balance here too. Now, because of this imperative fund, but also a lot of the steps we took to ensure that our students would be safe coming back to campus, and all kinds of COVID protocols and social distancing and masking, and offering classes both online and in person, and limited number of seats and disinfecting classrooms. And we changed our curriculum so that students weren't going to be on buses all the time going back and forth between the two colleges.
Sure.
And we took extraordinary steps to ensure the safety and well-being of our students.
And let me just interject quick, just so people get that. You mentioned before, at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, depending on the major, you had your classes on either campus. And there's a bus system that goes about every 15 minutes called the Link that essentially I was used to when I was on campus there. Every day, there'd be a couple of bus rides back and forth from one campus to the other, depending on what the class was. So I just wanted to expand a little on when you're mentioning you rearranged the classes, it sounds like, so you would stay on one campus or another, essentially.
Yeah, and in fact, in the way we did that, Joe, was typically at a college, you take 4 classes simultaneously throughout a semester. We switched to what's called the block system. And instead of having 4 concurrent classes, we had students taking 1 class at a time for 3.5 weeks. So there were 4 blocks. And the advantage of it was they would always be going to the same classroom at the same time every day. And they weren't traveling on buses multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And they could complete an entire class. And if COVID had interrupted an entire semester, you would have been left with 4 classes unfinished.
Right.
In this instance, you were completing one every 3.5 weeks, so nothing was going to be left unfinished. It was very effective.
Mm-hmm.
But to the point about enrollment, because of all these steps and the financial aid we were able to provide, we had a very solid enrollment year at St. John's. And we were only one of 2 Minnesota private colleges that actually saw an increase in the size of their first year class. And we're extraordinarily proud of that. Similarly, retention from first semester to second semester was very good too. So we had a goal for returning students, after the holidays, and a lot of colleges, including ourselves, had to send some students home, right after Thanksgiving. And we all wondered, are they going to be coming back? At St. John's, we exceeded our retention goals from first semester to second semester by 10 students. And we only have 50 students overall who opted to stay at home and take their classes online with our professors, obviously, rather than return to campus. And that's extraordinary. And, I think, part of it is the safeties and protocols we had in place, but part of it is just the Johnny experience.
Right.
If you had a choice of taking your classes online and living in your parents' basement, or returning to Collegeville and hanging out with your buddies and going to classes in person in this great environment, the sense of community that St. John's is so known for, that deep sense of belonging and a sense of community, it's a pretty easy choice. And our students voted with their feet. They came back.
Yeah. We talk about different monks that have had an influence, and at St. John's, there is a monastery on campus. What do you think that the monastery and the monks that you've been involved with, how does that add to the culture? And what are some of the relationships maybe you've had that have been important to you?
Well, it truly makes us distinctive. And when we're talking about earlier on about great things that have been said about St. John's, there's actually 5 colleges or universities in the country named St. John's. And the one that most people know of is in, New York.
New York, yeah. Right.
They're Division I basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a Johnny, and I met him one time in D.C., and he said when he came out to D.C., he'd be at these social gatherings, and people would come up to him and ask them, where did you go to college? And he'd say, St. John's. And they'd say, oh, New York? He said, no. And they'd say, Annapolis? Well, no. Oh, Santa Fe. And by that point, the person would lose interest and walk away.
Right.
So this alumnus name is Tom Super. Yeah. And so Tom decided he had to come up with another line. So he came up with a great line. When people would come up to him and say, where'd you go to college? He'd say, I went to college at a Benedictine monastery. And there would be this silence, but then there's the intrigue and a little mystery. Mm-hmm. And people would say, really? What's that all about? And then he'd get to tell them the story. And he'd tell them the story about St. John's. And it would become a great storytelling moment. So, Joe, you and I went to college at a Benedictine monastery. And there are right now about 100 monks in the monastery at St. John's. They do a variety of things. Some are in parishes. Some are teach at St. John's. Not as many as certainly at one time when all the faculty was monks. Mm-hmm. So there's been a decline because these communities are smaller in size. Mm-hmm. But they're still very active in their various ministries. Mm-hmm. And there's a monk on most of the dorm floors. Yeah. They're faculty residents. Mm-hmm. And they're there as mentors. And they're there as an older voice and some font of wisdom to turn to. And I think that most Johnnies, one of the things they appreciate most is the relationships that they've developed with monks either in the classroom or on the dorm floors over their experience.
Right.
When I was right out of St. John's, the monk I knew best and is a deep personal friend to this day is Father Dan Ward. He taught constitutional law. I worked for him as a student, so great friendship. But, having worked at St. John's now for almost 30 years, I know most of the monks on a first-time basis have a lot of deep friendships, and they're truly remarkable men who devote their lives to God. They have the saying is worship and work. They're a praying community, but they also are very active in the work that they do. And they also devote themselves to the education and formation of young men. Mm-hmm. And they do that, and they do it well, and they do it with purpose. Mm-hmm. I think the true beauty of St. John's, though, is that we're there to help boys become men.
Yeah.
And to understand what it means to be a man in our society today, and to take on responsibilities, whether that be in their family life, their work life, to their community. And I think that St. John's does it's a men's college.
Right.
It should do a great job of raising good men. And I think that we can trace that back to the monastic presence at St. John's and these extraordinary men who help us understand ourselves to a much deeper extent.
So tell me a little bit more about the advancement team that you lead at St. John's. How many people actually make up the advancement office?
Yeah, there's about 35 on the advancement team, and they do different things. Some people are focused on alumni relations. Some do corporate foundation relations or grant writing. Mm-hmm. Others are focused on our data and our research, and others are working exclusively for raising funds for, say, the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, right, which is a part of St. John's, or our graduate school of theology and seminary, or they might help out with, raising funds for the St. John's Arboretum, mm-hmm, or the St. John's Pottery Studio, mm-hmm, or the St. John's Bible. St. John's is a place of many initiatives, and our office does our best to help promote and educate about all of them, and of course, raise support for them.
You've been in your position for a number of years now. I know that generally in the advancement world, people tend to change organizations pretty frequently. What continues to inspire you to keep your position at St. John's?
Yeah, I have a pretty long tenure, and, the average tenure in a position or in a place is, 2-3 years.
Got it.
People do move around in the profession. I think at St. John's, there's a lot of longevity, not just in the advancement office, but elsewhere. People deliberately choose to come to St. John's. Mm-hmm. There's something about the place, there's something about the people, there's something about the beauty of the environment that draws people, and they stay. For my own part, I never imagined to spend my career at St. John's, but it's been an extraordinary experience for me. I like to tell people I have the best job in the world. I get to work for St. John's. I have an incredible team of colleagues that share the same values and devotions to St. John's that I do. And we get to work with Johnnies like you, Joe, who get involved in the alumni board, and they attend our events, and our football games are the most highly attended football games in Division III in the country. When we play St. Thomas down in the Twin Cities, when we were at Target Field, there was 37,000 people who showed up at that game.
Just for the rest of the people that are listening who may not be familiar, so St. John's, of course, a Benedictine monastery college up in northern Minnesota, right? University of St. Thomas is in St. Paul, and it's another Catholic college within our conference. And traditionally, from a sporting standpoint, the St. John's Johnnies and the St. Thomas Tommies have traditionally been two of the top programs in a variety of sports, but in particular, the football game between St. John's and St. Thomas in Minnesota. That's the best rivalry that there is. So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. But, it goes back to your original question of, our team. And I was just making the point that we've got these great traditions. We have diehard, loyal alumni who love the place. And it's one of the reasons why it's such an enjoyable place for us as a team to work. And as far as how do I approach this from a leadership point of view?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's evolved over the years, but I am absolutely convinced it's all about hiring the right talent and giving people the tools and the resources to do their job, hold people accountable, and just let them soar. We have continuity of our team, I think, because we've built a culture of excellence and success. We set our sights high targets every year. It's kind of like when you played for John Ghilardi. You guys expected to be in the playoffs every year.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
We have that same expectation in the advancement office every year. We're going to achieve our goals. And when they're raised every year, no one frets. They say, okay, let's regroup. Let's go after it.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe we can get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because of the people that are there are great souls. They're hardworking. They're there for the right reasons, and they want to succeed.
I assume part of the great satisfaction for your team is knowing that maybe you changed the lives of young men who, without your fundraising, would not have been able to afford to attend St. John's. Do you have any meaningful individual stories that come to mind?
Yeah, let me give you a couple examples. But first, to set that up, we have a mission for our office, and it's to engage people in support of St. John's. Okay, pretty simple. That's the important thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of give it a nickname. It's we make dreams come true. And those dreams are the dreams that our students have and our faculty in this educational environment. And no dream is better fulfilled than enabling a young man to come to college to get an education. And we have story after story of people who come to St. John's from very modest backgrounds and are able to fulfill their dreams because of the scholarship support that they receive, and those are the dollars we raised. And I can't think of a more fulfilling job than that. One of the most recent that we shared the story far and wide was a student who graduated 2 years ago in May. And on his graduation day, he posted on his Facebook site something to the effect that 7 years ago, I was living in a car. 5 years ago, we were in a homeless shelter. 4 years ago, I got admitted to St. John's. Today, I'm graduating. To go from being homeless on the streets to being a college graduate, that's pretty extraordinary. We have another student who told his story. He grew up in El Salvador. His family fled the oppression. They came to Los Angeles. They didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, learned about St. John's, and came to St. John's and graduated in 4 years. He has gotten into politics. He worked for Amy Klobuchar's campaign. He just sent a message to us the other day. Well, actually, it was on his Facebook page that he's been, he's achieved one of his next dreams was to get into the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota in public policy.
Oh, wow.
To see that rags to riches story and to know that St. John's played a part in that and that our office played a part in that, again, there's not many jobs out there where you can see such a direct line of what you do on a daily basis impacting not just the student's life, but his families and the communities in which these young men will return and the places they will work. That is truly fulfilling.
So kind of extending that thought just a little bit, how do you define being successful? What is success to you?
Well, I define it in a group context. If our team is successful, I'm successful.
Mm-hmm.
That's the mantra in our office. We're one team. We do it together, and we roll up our sleeves together. We celebrate our success together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the type of person who needs a pat on the back or to be told congratulations. I'd much rather have that go to the entire team and to others. If St. John's wins, we win. If we win, I win. It's as simple as that.
That's great. Rob, I could continue because, again, St. John's is one of my favorite places. I could continue on forever. But I think we'll have to leave it here for today. I do appreciate, for me, boy, just you bring up the topic of St. John's and hearing how you describe it and your experience, and it brings me back. I enjoy it. I enjoy being part of it again, and I thank you for sharing everything about what you guys do in the advancement office and the experience at St. John's.
Well, thanks, Joe. It's great to see you. I want to thank you for all you do for St. John's. You're living proof of the great outcomes of a St. John's education.
You've been listening to Rob Culligan, VP of Institutional Advancement at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. If you'd like to learn more about St. John's University or their sister school, the College of St. Benedict, you can find information at csbsju.edu. Next time on the Ascent Podcast, we chat with Jay Allen, author of the book Bucketheads and founding partner of the consulting firm Masters Alliance. Jay talks about the importance of his Navy experience as a young adult.
It was fundamental and foundation to almost everything I've been able to achieve in the rest of my career.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.